There's a moment, almost every day, that you never notice happening. It lasts less than a second. Someone says something. Something goes wrong. Someone doesn't say the thing you needed them to say. And in that half second, something quietly changes hands. Most people spend their whole lives never knowing this moment exists. And so they spend their whole lives handing it away, over and over, to strangers, to people they love, to an old argument that ended years ago, to a voice in their own head that was never really theirs to begin with. This isn't a video about 10 tips for staying calm. Over the next few minutes, we're going to walk through a series of very ordinary moments, the kind that happen in kitchens, in cars, in front of mirrors, moments so small you'd never think to mention them to anyone. But each one is going to ask the same question, without ever saying it out loud. Who, exactly, gets to decide how I feel right now? We'll walk through this with the help of ideas often associated with Carl Jung, not as a lecture, but as a lens, a way of seeing what's actually happening underneath the moments that seem to ruin our days, damage our relationships, and keep us awake at 2 a.m., rehearsing conversations that never happen the way we needed them to. Nothing here will make the world gentler. People will still disappoint you tomorrow. That was never going to change. What can change is something much closer to home, quiet, almost invisible, and far more powerful than anything the world can do to you. Let's begin where it always begins, with someone that never even knew your name. The greatest prison most people live in has no walls. It has opinions. One careless sentence from a stranger, and suddenly, your entire day no longer belongs to you. How does that happen? How does someone you'll never see again get to decide whether you feel calm or wrecked for the next 8 hours? Imagine a successful businessman who once sat across from a psychologist and said, "I run a company of 200 people. I make decisions worth millions. And yet, one rude comment from my secretary this morning ruined my entire day." Now imagine Jung quietly watching this moment. He wouldn't begin by asking what the secretary said. From a Jungian perspective, the more revealing question might be, why did those words find a place to live inside you? The businessman had no answer. Most of us don't either. Because here's what actually happens, almost every single day, to almost every one of us. A stranger cuts in front of you without apology. A coworker walks past without returning your greeting. Someone you care about reads your message and never replies. Nothing physically happens to you. And yet, inside, something starts to unravel. Your mind starts writing stories. Did I do something wrong? Why would they treat me like that? People have no respect anymore. Within minutes, one small moment has become the emotional center of your entire day. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The event lasted 3 seconds. The suffering lasted 3 hours. Where did the other 2 hours, 59 minutes, and 57 seconds come from? They came from you. The event knocked on the door. The mind invited it in, made it tea, and let it stay for hours. One idea often associated with Jungian psychology is the autonomous complex, a small emotional charge that can seize the wheel of your mind before your conscious self even notices it happened. It doesn't ask permission. It just drives. Most of us spend years believing our emotions are controlled by what happens outside of us. They made me angry. She ruined my day. He embarrassed me. It feels true because the emotion arrives so fast we mistake it for reality. But look again. Did that person steal your peace? Or did you unknowingly hand it over? This is where it gets strange. Because if your peace can be handed over without you noticing, that means it can also be taken back the same way. Quietly. Without anyone's permission but your own. Imagine carrying a priceless crystal bowl through a crowded city. People bump into you. Cars make noise. The streets are chaotic. You cannot control the crowd. But you can decide how tightly, how carefully, you carry what is precious. Your inner peace is no different. The world has never promised to become quieter. Someone will misunderstand your intentions. Someone else will criticize your choices. Waiting for the world to become gentle before you allow yourself to feel peaceful is like waiting for the ocean to stop making waves before you learn to sail. It will never happen. So what did the businessman do with that question? Imagine him sitting with it. Uncomfortably, at first, nobody enjoys being asked why they let a stranger drive their mood. Now imagine that same businessman, a year later. Same job, same secretary, same sharp tongue on the same rude mornings. But something had changed. Not the world around him. Him. I still notice the comment, he might say. I just no longer let it walk into the boardroom with me. That's the shift. It doesn't begin when people become kinder. It begins the moment you realize your response belongs to you. Not to the person who offended you. Not to the circumstances. Not even to your past. There is always a brief space between what happens and what you choose to do next. Most people never notice it. They react automatically. They defend. They attack. They withdraw. Then later, they wonder why the same argument keeps happening, with different faces for the rest of their lives. A Jungian view would suggest, what you don't confront in yourself, you will keep meeting in the world. But those who learn to recognize that half-second gap discover something extraordinary living inside it. Not the freedom to control life. The freedom to choose who you become because of it. The next time someone speaks to you with disrespect, don't rush to answer. Notice your breathing. Watch the emotion rise without immediately obeying it. Anger arrives like a storm, but storms always pass. You don't have to become the storm. The greatest victory is rarely winning an argument. It is refusing to let another person's behavior decide the condition of your own mind. Because the day you stop giving strangers access to your inner peace is the day your life quietly begins to change. And here's the strange part. This is only the smallest battle. It's easy, relatively, to stay calm when a stranger insults you. The real test begins when the people who hurt you are the ones you love. A stranger's insult fades by evening, but a careless word from someone you love, it can live in you for 20 years. Most people spend their entire lives answering the wrong question about pain like this. They ask, why did they say that? They rarely ask the question that actually matters. She was washing dishes one evening. The kitchen was quiet, the kind of quiet where your hands are busy, but your mind wanders somewhere it wasn't invited. Then, without warning, a sentence she hadn't heard in 30 years returned with perfect clarity. Not the memory of a memory. The sentence itself, in her mother's exact tone, like it had been spoken seconds ago. You were always the difficult one. She set the plate down. 30 years. One sentence. Still sharp enough to cut. That's not how memory normally works. We forget entire years of our lives. But we remember, with perfect clarity, the exact tone someone used when they disappointed us. From a Jungian perspective, this isn't a coincidence. It's a clue. The people closest to us aren't just people. They're mirrors. And the closer someone stands to your heart, the larger and clearer that mirror becomes. A stranger's words bounce off you because there's no mirror there, just noise. But the people you love are standing close enough that their words don't bounce off. They land somewhere. They land on the parts of you that already believed, quietly, that maybe you are difficult or unlovable or not enough. Here's the truth almost no one wants to sit with. The wound isn't only what they said. The wound is what was already tender, waiting there, long before they ever said it. This doesn't mean the person who hurt you was right. It doesn't mean you deserved it. It means something else, something Jungian psychology often points toward. We don't just get hurt by others. We get hurt by others finding something we hadn't yet healed in ourselves. Think about the last time someone close to you said something that cut deep. It rarely was just the sentence. It was that the sentence confirmed a fear you'd been carrying long before they ever opened their mouth. There are really only two doors after being hurt by someone you love. Door one, you turn the pain outward. You replay their words as evidence of who they are. You build a case against them. You tell the story to friends, to yourself, at 2 a.m., over and over, and each retelling makes the wound a little more permanent, like pressing a bruise to check if it still hurts. Door two is harder to find, and almost no one shows it to you. Door 2 is turning toward the wound itself, not to blame yourself, but to finally ask it a question nobody asked it before. What is it in me that this touched? Imagine that same woman, years later, standing at the sink again. Except this time, she doesn't chase the old argument. She doesn't rehearse what she should have said back. Instead, for the first time, she asks a different question, not why did she say that, but why have I never let go of needing her to see me differently? That single shift, from why did they hurt me to why does this still have power over me, is, from a Jungian lens, one of the most difficult and most freeing turns a person can make. It doesn't excuse the people who hurt us. It just quietly takes the remote control out of their hands. Because here's the part nobody tells you about people you love: they will disappoint you. Not because they're cruel, usually the opposite. Closeness itself removes the filters we use with strangers. People say to those they love the tired, careless, half-formed things they'd never say to a coworker. Not always cruelty. Often just exhaustion, wearing the mask of cruelty. That doesn't make it hurt less, but it changes what you're actually healing from. You're not just healing from their words. You're healing from the mirror they accidentally held up, one that showed you a fear about yourself you hadn't looked at directly yet. And once you see that clearly, something strange happens. The words start to lose their grip. Not because you decided to let it go through sheer willpower. That rarely works for long. It's because you finally addressed what the words were actually standing on. The next time someone you love says something that lands like a blow, try asking, quietly, privately, not to excuse them, but for yourself. Is this pain entirely about what they just said, or is some of it much older than this conversation? The sentence only knocked. The wound opened the door. We spend years believing other people are our deepest wound, until one day, we discover the voice we've been listening to the longest is our own. That's where we go next. There is a voice that follows you into every room you enter. It doesn't need a stranger to activate it. It doesn't need someone you love to say the wrong thing. It's already running, quietly, in the background, long before anyone else says a word. He was standing in front of the bathroom mirror at 11 p.m., toothbrush still in hand, replaying a meeting from 6 hours earlier. Nobody in that meeting remembered what he'd said. He'd already run it through his mind 40 times. That was so stupid. Why did you say that? They probably think you're an idiot. No one else was in the room. No one else needed to be. Most people assume their harshest critic is out there somewhere. A parent, an ex, a boss, a stranger online. But for most of us, the loudest voice in the room isn't coming from anyone in it. From a Jungian perspective, this inner voice is often a fragment of what Jung called the shadow. Not evil, not something to destroy, but a disowned part of the self, usually formed early, usually absorbed from someone else's voice long ago, that eventually starts speaking in first person. It stops sounding like them. It starts sounding like you. That's what makes it so dangerous. You can walk away from a cruel stranger. You can set a boundary with a difficult parent. You can leave a relationship that keeps hurting you. You cannot walk away from your own mind. Or so it feels, until you notice something strange, something almost nobody points out. This voice speaks in a very specific tone. Not curious, not honest, not even really yours if you listen closely. It sounds exactly like every person who ever criticized you, merged into one. The teacher who said you'd never be good at this. The parent who said you were too much or not enough. The old friend who laughed at the wrong moment. Somewhere along the way, you stopped needing them to say it. You learned to say it faster than they could, before they even had the chance, because if you criticized yourself first, it couldn't be used against you. It felt like protection. It was never protection. It was a habit dressed as safety. Here's the part that changes everything once you actually see it. You didn't choose this voice. You inherited it. Which means, and this is the part most people never get to, you didn't choose it, but you are the one keeping it employed. Imagine that same man, months later, standing at the same mirror. Same tired eyes, same late hour. But this time, when the voice starts, that was so stupid. He does something different. He doesn't argue with it. He doesn't agree with it either. He just asks it a question, almost out of curiosity. Asterisk, whose voice is this, really? And for the first time in years, the voice hesitates. This is not about self-esteem exercises or repeating affirmations in a mirror. Positive self-talk, imposed on top of an unexamined wound, usually doesn't hold. It's like painting over rust. From a Jungian view, what actually creates change is not silencing the harsh inner voice, but recognizing it clearly enough that it loses its disguise. A shadow only rules you while it goes unseen. The moment you see it, really see it, not fight it, it stops speaking with total authority. That doesn't mean the voice disappears. It probably won't, not fully, but it stops being mistaken for truth. It becomes what it always was, an old recording, playing on a loop, using a volume it was never actually entitled to. The next time you catch yourself in that particular tone, tearing yourself apart faster and more thoroughly than anyone else ever could, try pausing before you believe it. Ask quietly, asterisk, is this actually my thought? Or is this a voice I borrowed a long time ago and never returned? You may find that the cruelest person in the room was never in the room at all. He was living inside your own reflection, wearing your voice, saying words that were never really yours to begin with. And once you learn to recognize that voice for what it is, something else becomes possible. Because if you can hear a borrowed voice clearly enough to stop obeying it, you can also start listening for a different one, a quieter one that was never trying to hurt you. That's where we go next. Most people go their entire lives without hearing it clearly, even once. Not because it's hidden, because it's quiet, and everything else in the mind has learned to shout. She was sitting in her car in a parking lot, engine off, keys still in her hand, 20 minutes before she was supposed to walk into a job interview she didn't want. Everyone around her had opinions. Her mother said, take it, the salary's good. Her friends said you'd be crazy to turn it down. Her own inner critic, the one we already met, the one wearing borrowed voices, was listing every reason she wasn't in a position to be picky. All of it was loud. All of it was confident. None of it was quiet enough to be trusted. Underneath all that noise, barely audible, was something else. Not a thought exactly. More like a feeling with a direction to it. A small, steady no. She almost missed it. Most people do. From a Jungian perspective, this is often described as the difference between the ego, the noisy, anxious, image-managing part of the mind that wants to look good, stay safe, and avoid discomfort, and something deeper, sometimes called the self, which doesn't argue, doesn't panic, and never raises its voice. That's exactly why it's so easy to miss. In a mind full of shouting, the inherited criticism, the fear of disappointing people, the anxious calculations about what others will think, the one voice that actually knows what's true for you sounds almost like silence by comparison. We've spent 3 parts learning to survive the noise. The stranger's careless words, the wound from someone we love, the borrowed voice that criticizes us before anyone else can. All of that was necessary. You cannot hear a quiet voice while you're still flinching from loud ones. But surviving the noise was never the destination. It was only clearing the room. Here's what almost no one tells you. The goal was never to become numb to criticism or immune to hurt or emotionally armored enough that nothing gets through. That's not peace. That's just a quieter kind of prison, one where you've simply stopped feeling anything at all. The actual goal is to clear enough space that you can finally hear the one voice that was never trying to hurt you in the first place. It rarely sounds dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It won't insist. If you've spent years obeying the loudest voice in any room, including the one inside your own head, this quieter signal can feel almost like nothing at all. A slight tightening, a flicker of relief at the thought of saying no, a feeling, when you imagine one path, of your shoulders dropping half an inch. Imagine that same woman, still sitting in the parking lot. She doesn't have a dramatic realization. She doesn't hear a booming voice of clarity. She just notices that small, steady no again, And this time, instead of arguing with it or drowning it out, she simply doesn't start the car engine toward the interview. She sits with it a moment longer. And it doesn't get louder. It doesn't need to. That's often how you know it's real. The false voices, the critic, the fear, the borrowed opinions of everyone who's ever had something to say about your life. They need volume to convince you. They repeat themselves. They escalate. They pressure. The quiet voice doesn't do any of that. It says its piece once, clearly, and then waits, patiently, sometimes for years, for you to finally be still enough to hear it. This is, in many ways, the real work beneath everything we've covered. Not becoming someone who never gets hurt. Not becoming someone who never doubts. But becoming someone quiet enough, inside, to tell the difference between the voice that wants to protect your image and the voice that actually knows what's true for you. The next time you're facing a decision and your mind fills with everyone else's opinions, including your own harshest ones, try this. Stop listening for the loudest answer. Listen for the quietest one instead. It's probably already there. It's probably already answered. It's just been waiting for the noise to finally run out of things to say. And once you can hear that voice reliably, once you know the difference between the noise and the signal, something changes that goes beyond any single conversation, any single relationship, any single wound. You stop needing the world to be calm in order to feel calm yourself. You stop needing people to change in order to feel free of them. You stop needing the loudest voice in your own head to fall silent, because you've finally learned to listen past it. That's not the absence of struggle. It's something quieter and rarer than that. It's the moment you realize your peace was never something the world was going to hand you. It was something you had, all along, underneath the noise, waiting for you to finally stop shouting long enough to hear it. There's a particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. It's the tired of a mind that's still running a case file on someone from 3 years ago, gathering evidence, rehearsing arguments, keeping receipts on a conversation that ended long before the mind agreed to let it end. He kept a mental list. Not on paper. He would have been embarrassed to write it down. But he could recite it instantly. The birthday his brother forgot. The loan that was never quite repaid. The comment at Christmas dinner 4 years ago that he could still quote word for word, with the exact inflection. He hadn't spoken to his brother in 8 months. Not because of one explosive fight. Because of the list, quietly growing, item by item, each new grievance filed next to the old ones, building a case for a trial that would never actually happen. Here's what he didn't notice. He wasn't punishing his brother anymore. He was the only one still in the courtroom. Most people believe holding on to anger is a form of strength, proof that what happened to them mattered, proof they won't be walked over again. There's some truth buried in that instinct. Anger often does protect something real, some legitimate wound that deserves to be acknowledged rather than dismissed. But there's a difference between acknowledging a wound and living inside it. A grudge feels like a wall you've built to keep someone out. It rarely works that way. What it actually builds is a room, and you're the one locked inside it, replaying the same evidence, serving a sentence the other person doesn't even know exists. Think about it honestly. The person you're still angry at, are they thinking about this right now? Rehearsing the argument? Building their case? Usually not. Usually they've moved on, sometimes without even realizing there was a case against them in the first place. Which means the grudge isn't punishing them. It's just you, alone, still paying rent on a room they left years ago. From a Jungian perspective, unresolved resentment can resemble the way aspects of the shadow continue to influence us when they remain unexamined. It doesn't disappear just because you refuse to look at it. It goes underground and shapes your mood, your relationships, even conversations that have nothing to do with the original wound. You'll find yourself irritated at your partner for something small, and if you're honest, some of that heat was borrowed from a fight that happened with someone else entirely, years ago. Letting go doesn't mean deciding the other person was right. It doesn't mean the wound wasn't real, or that what they did was acceptable. That's the misunderstanding that keeps most people stuck. They think forgiveness requires agreeing that the harm didn't matter. It requires the opposite. It requires acknowledging the harm fully enough that you no longer need to keep proving it happened. A year later, his brother called about their mother's birthday. Just logistics. What time? Who's bringing what? Neither of them mentioned the 8 months. But somehow they ended up at a diner afterward, the kind with sticky menus and coffee that comes before you ask for it. They talked about nothing, carefully. The weather, their mother's new dog. Then a silence landed between them, the kind that used to mean another accusation was loading, waiting for its turn. His coffee went cold while neither of them spoke. For years, silence like this had always meant something was about to be relitigated. This time it didn't. He looked at his brother across the table, at the tired lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and realized, almost without deciding to, that he was tired of remembering for two people. He didn't say, "I forgive you." He said something smaller and truer. "I don't want to carry this anymore." That sentence wasn't about his brother at all. It was about him, finally setting down something he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it had weight. This is the part almost no one tells you about grudges. They don't end when the other person apologizes. Some people never will. Some conversations never happen. If you wait for the other person to earn your release, you may be waiting for the rest of your life, standing guard over a wound that only you are still tending. The release doesn't come from them. It comes from the moment you finally ask yourself a harder question than were they wrong. You ask, what is this costing me to keep proving it? The next time you notice yourself replaying an old grievance, rehearsing the argument you never got to finish, try this instead of reaching for evidence. Ask what you're actually protecting by holding on. Sometimes it's dignity. Sometimes it's fear of being hurt that way again. Sometimes, if you're honest, it's simply a story that's easier to hold on to than the uncertainty of letting it go. Whatever it is, name it. It rarely survives being looked at directly. Because here's the quiet truth underneath all of this. You can be right about what happened to you, and still be the one paying the price for staying in the courtroom. Every part we've walked through so far has asked the same question in a different voice. The stranger, the person you love, the critic inside your own head, the quiet voice underneath the noise, and now, the case file you've been keeping on someone who may not even remember the trial is still open. Each time, the answer has been the same. The peace was never something someone else was going to hand you, or something you'd feel once every account was finally settled. It was something you were free to put down the entire time, the moment you were finally willing to stop keeping score. There's a specific kind of exhausting. It's not the exhaustion of being wronged. It's the exhaustion of being wronged and knowing, with total certainty, that the other person will never see it the way you do. She'd rehearsed the conversation 40, maybe 50 times. In the shower, in traffic, lying awake at 1 a.m., staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. Every version ended the same way, with her friend finally understanding, finally saying, "You're right. I was wrong. I see it now." That conversation never actually happened. Not because she never had the chance. She had it twice. Both times, her friend nodded, said she understood, and then, within a week, did something that made it clear she hadn't understood at all. Not really. Not the way it mattered. Here's what took her over a year to notice. She wasn't actually upset about the original disagreement anymore. She was upset that she couldn't make someone else see it her way. Most people never separate these two things. The wound, and the need for the wound to be witnessed exactly as you experienced it. They feel like the same ache. They're not. From a Jungian perspective, there's something worth naming here. The ego doesn't just want to be at peace. It wants to be right, and more specifically, it wants to be seen as right by the very person who hurt it. That need can run so deep it quietly takes over, until the original wound becomes almost secondary to the campaign to have it acknowledged. This is a different trap than the courtroom we talked about before. The courtroom is about punishment, building a case, keeping score. This is subtler. This is about validation. You're not trying to make the other person suffer. You're trying to make them understand. And somewhere along the way, you've made your own peace conditional on something you cannot control, another person's willingness to see inside your experience exactly the way you lived it. Nobody can fully do that. Not your closest friend. Not your parent. Not your partner of 20 years. Every person carries their own version of every shared moment, shaped by their own history, their own blind spots, their own reasons for remembering things differently than you do. Waiting for someone to finally understand you completely is like waiting for someone to read a book you never wrote down. The version in your head was never fully transferable to begin with. Her phone was already in her hand. She had typed the message, the 51st rehearsal, finally put into words. Read it twice. Her thumb hovered over send. Then she just watched the screen go dark. Without pressing it, she sat there a moment, keys still in the ignition, and looked at the steering wheel instead of the phone. And she realized something she'd never actually asked herself before in all those rehearsals. Not how to make the message land better. Just why she kept needing to send it at all. What am I actually trying to get from this conversation that I don't already have? The honest answer surprised her. She wasn't looking for an apology anymore. She'd already had one, twice. She was looking for her friend to feel as bad as she'd felt, to carry some of the weight she'd been carrying alone. As long as her friend seemed fine, some part of her felt like the injury wasn't real yet, like it needed an audience to be valid. That realization didn't fix the friendship, but it changed something quieter and in some ways more important. She stopped needing the conversation to happen for the pain to be allowed to end. This is the part that's easy to misunderstand. Letting go of the need to be understood isn't the same as deciding you don't matter or that what happened doesn't matter. It's the opposite. It's deciding that what happened to you is real and valid whether or not any particular person ever agrees with your account of it. Your experience doesn't need a witness to be true. That's a hard thing to accept because we're built for connection. We want our pain to land somewhere, to be received, to matter to someone else the way it matters to us. There's nothing wrong with wanting that. The trouble starts when wanting it becomes needing it. When your peace is quietly outsourced to whether or not someone else ever gets it. The next time you catch yourself rehearsing a conversation for the 5th or 15th time, building the perfect explanation that will finally make someone see it your way, try pausing before the next rehearsal starts. Ask yourself what she asked, sitting in that car with the screen gone dark. What am I actually trying to get from this that I don't already have? Sometimes the honest answer is that you already have everything you actually need. The clarity, the knowledge that you're not making it up, the simple fact that it happened and it mattered. The only thing missing is someone else's signature on it. It turns out you were never required to wait for that signature to move forward. By now, you may already understand all of this. Understanding was never the difficult part. Living it is. The alarm went off at 6:40, same as always. She didn't reach for her phone first. That was the first thing that was different, though she didn't notice it yet. Outside, a garbage truck was doing its usual Tuesday route, the same grinding, mechanical sound that used to make her wince before she'd even opened her eyes. One more thing the world was doing to her before the day had even started. This morning, it was just a truck, doing its job, nothing personal in it at all. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the familiar weight to arrive, the low hum of dread that usually showed up before she remembered why. It didn't come, not because anything had been resolved. Her brother still lived 4 states away. Her old friend still didn't understand, and might never. The voice in the mirror hadn't been silenced forever. It would show up again, probably by lunchtime. Nothing outside her had changed, and that was exactly the point. We started this journey with a stranger, someone who cut in line, who didn't say sorry, who had no idea they'd been handed the keys to someone else's entire day. We asked a simple question back then, one that seemed almost too obvious to matter. Did that person steal your peace, or did you hand it over? It turns out that question was never really about strangers. It followed us into the kitchen, where a woman heard her mother's voice return after 30 years and discovered the wound wasn't only what was said, it was what had been tender long before the words arrived. It followed us to a bathroom mirror at 11 p.m., where a man discovered the cruelest voice in the room was wearing his own. It followed us into a parking lot, where someone learned to listen for a signal quieter than every voice competing to be heard. It followed us into a courtroom no one else knew existed, and into a car where a message went unsent. 6 different rooms, 6 different people. One question, asked over and over, in different clothes. Asterisk who, exactly, is deciding how I feel right now? Here's what nobody tells you at the start of a journey like this. The answer doesn't arrive once, permanently, like a door closing behind you for good. It arrives in pieces on ordinary Tuesdays, usually without ceremony. You don't wake up transformed. You wake up, and the garbage truck is just a garbage truck. That's not a small thing. It only looks small from the outside. Because here's what was actually happening in every one of those 6 moments, underneath the different stories. Something was always trying to reach in and drive. A stranger's rudeness. A loved one's careless sentence. A borrowed, inherited voice pretending to be your own thoughts. The noise of everyone else's opinions drowning out the one that was actually yours. An old grievance, still demanding rent. A need for someone else to finally agree that you'd been hurt. Different disguises. Same hand on the wheel, every time, trying to take it from you. From a Jungian perspective, growth isn't a finish line. It moves more like a spiral. You return to familiar struggles, but never as the exact same person who faced them last time. You will lose your peace again. Someone will say something careless. An old grudge will surface uninvited. The voice in the mirror will find something new to criticize. The difference won't be that it stops happening. The difference will be how quickly you notice the door and how much say you have in whether anything gets invited in. She finally got up, made coffee, and stood by the window for a moment before the day officially started. The garbage truck had moved on. The street was quiet again. Nothing had been solved exactly. Her brother hadn't called. Her friend still didn't understand. The critic in the mirror was probably already warming up for tomorrow. But she noticed she was still standing there, coffee in hand, feeling, for no particular reason, on an entirely ordinary Tuesday, okay. Not because the world had finally gone quiet. Because she had. The world will keep reaching for the wheel. It always will. The difference is, it no longer gets to drive. De beau cas, because you finally came home to yourself, Theo Lua Chane, it no longer gets to drive. Dung Mot Min Lam Diem Kep Vong Bu Tuong. Will 2 Part 1. Tao Koang Lang Cho Kanjia, Tu Hon Tien Cam Suk Thay V by Dan Dat them. Tone Bo 7 Fan Geo de Hon Chin. 7 rooms. One question, asked in different clothes each time. A stranger who never knew what he took. A mother's voice that outlived 30 years. A mirror that lied about who was really talking. A parking lot quiet enough to finally hear something true. A courtroom with no judge but you. A message that was never sent. And an ordinary Tuesday, where a garbage truck was just a garbage truck. None of these rooms close after you leave them. You'll walk back into all 7, probably more than once, for the rest of your life. That was never the failure. That's just what the spiral looks like from the inside. The only thing that changes is how quickly you notice the door and how much say you have in what gets to walk through it. If one of these 7 rooms felt like somewhere you've been standing for a while, you're not alone in it. More people are standing there than you'd think. Tell us in the comments which room found you tonight. Sometimes just naming it is the first thing that loosens its grip. And if this kind of journey is something you want more of, not 10 tips, not a lecture, but a real walk through the rooms most of us never talk about, consider staying. There's more of this ahead. The wheel is still yours. It always was.